Hello and welcome to Storytime. My name's Nancy Christie, and in each episode I'll be sharing an excerpt from a short story that's appeared in one of my two collections, either Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories or Peripheral Visions and Other Stories. And I hope you enjoy the short reading that I'll be giving you. But in today's episode, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the collections themselves. My very first collection was called Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories. It originally was released in 2014, and then in 2019, the collection was brought out by Unsolicited Press. Now, the premise behind the stories in that collection are that the characters either can't or won't get a handle on their life, or as you might think of it, as they're going down the highway of life, they keep going left of center. In some cases, they realize their error of their ways, grab that steering wheel, jerk it over, and get on the correct side of the road. In other cases, they're oblivious to the danger that they're facing. They just keep going. And then there are those characters who are completely convinced that they are on the correct side of the road and everybody else is in the wrong lane. So we have some funny stories, some more serious stories, some that are kind of with happy endings, some where the endings maybe aren't quite so happy, and then a few stories where you're left wondering what's going to happen next. Now, the other collection, which is called Peripheral Visions and Other Stories, there you go, is in a sense the opposite theme of Traveling Left of Center. You know, in Traveling Left of Center, as I said, the characters can't get a handle on life. In Peripheral Visions, they're bound and determined to get a handle on life. Life has dealt them a very odd hand to play with, and they're going to do the best that they can. Now, granted, in some cases, the choices they make may not be the ones that society would approve of, but it's their life, and they're just struggling to make it through, get through to the other side. Again, some of the stories are funny. Some of them are more serious, but you know, I like to think of them as hopeful stories because the characters do want to make the best of the situation that they find themselves in. So that's kind of the backstory of the two collections. Now let's talk about fiction, why I write fiction, why I like to write short stories in particular. And, you know, unfortunately, I can't give you a very clear answer as to why I write short stories, except it just always seemed a very natural way for me to express myself. I've been writing short stories my whole life. I think I wrote my very first short story when I was in second grade. And they usually come from an idea or a piece of dialogue or an interaction that I witness. And instead of looking at it and saying, oh, that's what the person meant, oh, that's what's really going on, I tend to go, what else could be going on? You know, we don't have to stay with the reality. Let's see what else we can do with that little tidbit that I've been given. Actually, in some cases, especially with the dialogue, the idea for the short story comes out of nowhere. You know, I'll be minding my own business, going for a walk, mowing the lawn, you know, running the sweep or whatever it is, just kind of a no-brainer kind of activity. And all of a sudden, this line of dialogue will come into my head, and then another one will follow, and then another one. And sometimes I'm not even entirely sure who the character is who's talking, but I do know that if I don't get it written down, then I run the risk of forgetting it and then saying, wait, what were they talking about? How did that go? Because it really sounds so good when you first hear it. But in any case, I love writing fiction. I love trying to figure out what's going to happen next. I'm definitely a pantser. I don't plot out my short stories. The novels that I work on, I don't plot them out either. It's more along the lines of, let's let it go. Let's see what happens next. Let the character be in charge. I feel that giving the character the right to determine where the story is going to go is always a better choice. It makes for a more alive story rather than one that is constrained by the author's determination. That is not to say that I don't do an awful lot of editing and revising. You know, the very first draft is exactly that, the very first draft. It's labeled with the story name, which generally stays the same, and then draft 1. Then I rename it draft 2, and that's where all the work comes in. The revising, the editing, the cleaning it up, the seeing if it makes sense what you're saying. One of the things I like to do, I belong to a writer's group, is I'll bring in one of my short stories and read them as much of the short story as I can, given whatever time allotment we have for that particular meeting, and then seeing what they think about it, seeing if it makes sense, because sometimes as the writer, it makes perfect sense to you, but people are listening to it and they don't have the backstory that is already in your head. So sometimes it'll be, well, I don't really understand why the character said that or did that or behaved in that fashion. But in any case, it's actually pure joy. I mean, there are some stories where I get so far and then I just can't seem to follow it through. So I just put that one aside. I figure I'll work on it later. But for the most part, I let the characters go. I follow them. In the revision, I clean it up. I make the path a little clearer for the reader. Sometimes I add in extra elements in the course of revising it. It's like a whole scene will just drop in and you're like, oh, okay, that belongs there. As a matter of fact, when I first started writing short stories, those many years ago, we didn't have computers. I worked on a typewriter. So of course, every time you revised it, you retyped it from scratch, from the very beginning, which can get a little irritating, but at the same time, it really gave you the ability to start working on it, to start revising it on the fly, as it were. So that was, of course, don't ask me to type them now. Thank you. No, I go right to the computer because I don't like transcribing, and I certainly can't read my own writing sometimes. But in any case, the short stories, they're fascinating because many times I'm not entirely sure what the story's about. Most of the time I don't know how the story's going to end until it ends. And then I read it over and I say, oh, that's why the character did that. Oh, that's the message of the story or the theme of that particular story. So it is a very enjoyable process for me because as I'm writing it, I'm reading it. And each time I revise it, then I'm reading it as if it's a whole new story that somebody else wrote. So that is the backstory on my 2 collections, on the themes of the 2 collections. And I hope when you stop back for another story time and you listen to an excerpt, you enjoy listening to the stories as much as I enjoyed writing them. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you back here again for the next story time. Bye-bye.